is determined by the law. It's a function of your contribution history and also your wage. Different from what we call a defined contribution. If it was a defined contribution plan, the law would have defined the contribution rate that must be paid. That's the promise. So we promise you from the benefit side. The question is, how will we pay for it? The financing of Social Security is hybrid. The current workers will pay the benefits of current pensioners. So it's highly dependent on the ratio of contributors to pensioners. The plan is designed such that in its early stage, the contribution rate is higher than the benefit. So we say that it's partially funded. So excess contributions that are not used to pay benefits are invested locally, regionally, and internationally. And that's a partial funded approach. By the funding mechanism where workers' monies are paid in, it therefore means that this is a trust fund. It is built up by workers and it is held for workers and beneficiaries. It's also mean that we as administrators are to be fiduciaries. We are to act in good faith, act with diligence and care, and act in the best interest of beneficiaries and contributors. Also, it's a fund. We invest it, and we have to ensure that we follow these principles of yield, meaning the return on your investment, safety, we must preserve the capital of the fund, liquidity, we must be able to turn the assets into cash when benefit is due, and social and economic utility. Because this is a trust fund, this is a fund that covers all on the solidarity principle, then we have to ensure that the funds are invested to benefit workers and their dependents. And hence you would have social security funds invested locally. How is this promise safeguarded? Potent is a promise, but how do we safeguard this promise? The establishment of a statutory body to administer the promise. And it is governed by a tripartite board. A tripartite means representative from government as the guarantor of the fund. Employers also make payment into NIS, and employers deduct contribution from employees to pay into the NIS. So employees also must get a seat at the board table. And it's administered by the director and the staff. And basically, our objective are to ensure that we are duty bound to ensure that the plan is sustainable. We also focus on coverage because of the universality element of it. We also focus on administrative efficiency. This is trust funds. We have to be very prudent with the use of funds and also good governance. We have to be accountable and we have to be transparent. The other question is, how is this promised assessed? Right? We conduct regular actuarial valuation of the National Insurance Fund. And that is a comprehensive assessment by an actuary to determine whether or not the fund is stable from a financial and actuarial standpoint. The actuary would also provide advice and recommendation regarding the sustainability, affordability, and adequacy of the fund. So this is done every 3 years in the case of St. Vincent. In some countries, the actuarial valuation is done every 5 years. Why actuarial reviews? One, it's a legal requirement, Section 17 of our Act. Two, it's good governance, accountability, and transparency. Three, policy advice and guidance to ensure the plan is sustainable. And four is the financial uncertainties that relate to this plan. This is a promise that extends 60 years into the future, a future that is volatile, a future with high degree of uncertainty, a future that is complex, and a future that is ambiguous, right? Also, the promise is influenced by demographic factors like longevity, life expectancy, fertility, migration. It's also impacted by the economic realities. And we all know the economic climate is very volatile. Hence, we need a specialist to manage, monitor the risk, be able to develop and communicate solutions to the administrators of the fund. Importantly, what are the components of this actuarial report? What the actuarial report comprises? The first element is data. We have to observe data or experience to shape the projection. So we get data on the population, data on the economy, data on the labor market. We also have to have a set of assumptions because we're going into future years. So the data reflect the past, but we also want to make an estimate what will happen in the future. And for that, we have to get assumptions. Assumptions in terms of how long someone lives, assumption in terms of the wages someone earns, assumption with regards to maternity, assumption with regards to our efficiency with the collection of contribution income. And the assumption and data set now are plugged into a model to do the projection. The standard model used by actuaries across the Caribbean is the ILO-PENS model that project the demographics, that is the number of beneficiaries, number of workers, and also the financial projections that deal with the wages and contribution income, the benefit expenses, the administrative expenses. So the actuary also has to do an assessment of the experience, the past. How have we managed this fund? So there's a historical assessment of performance. The actuary would also look at the projection. This spans traditionally over 60 years, but the 12th actuarial valuation will span over 75 years in terms of how the future look like based on current contribution rate and benefit levels. Then based on those numbers, how the contributions look like, how the benefit expenses look like, how the administrative expense look like, how the investment income look like, how the reserve shaped going forward, the actuarial gives certain recommendation to ensure this plan is sustainable, make sure benefit is adequate, and make sure that is affordable on part of workers and employers. So what our financial experience look like? We established since 1987, the 11th Actuarial Report valuation date is 31st December 2019. So the financial experience as reflected here is up to 2019. And that blue line represents the expenditure rate. That's the rate at which monies are paying out of the NIS. And we can see how that blue line is increasing exponentially, right? And the reason for that is that over time, the plan is maturing, meaning the number of pensioners are increasing. And the number of pensioners are increasing relative to the number of contributors. And that is why that line is exponentially increasing. That's the rate of which monies are paying out. The yellow line represents the contribution rate, the rate charged to employers and employees to ensure that the promised benefit can be met. And that rate initially started at 5.5, then it went up to 6% in 1997 when we introduced the employment injury, and it went to 8% in 2008 when we tried to improve the financial sustainability of the plan, and same in 2014, it went up by another 2% to 10%. So that's the movement. We set aside reserve in order to meet the expenditure. When we look at the reserve and we make it a ratio of the expenditure, we see that's the other graph, the green line is declining. And that is declining because the expenses are growing rapidly. And the expenses are growing faster than the reserves set aside. Importantly, as Social Security, we have to be prudent with the funds because these are trust funds. So we look at the administrative expense. And the administrative expense, as we see what happened from 87 to 2019, is trending downwards in recent time. Still at a level higher than the regional average. I mean, the last number we had, about every dollar collected in contribution income, we're spending about 15 cents in administrative expense. We want to get that down to 10, and we are working on that. We have funds for over the 36 years of operation, and we invest the fund locally, regionally, internationally. And the graph on the bottom left represents the yield. And you see the yield earned by Social Security is somewhat more volatile in the latter years. That is simply because in the latter years, NIS investment in international securities increased. So we wanted to diversify the portfolio from the local economy into the international economy. And the international economy, the market there is fragile, it's volatile. So the return, as we see, oscillates up and down. But on average, the return roughly 5% over average over the period 87 to 2019. I also included recent data so that we can see what we're doing up to 2022. And if we look at the benefit expenditure rate, the same blue line, you see it dipped in 2022. And that was a result because the contribution income performed solid in 2022. So the ratio for the insurable wages caused the ratio to decline, whilst benefits still increased, but the wage growth was significant. And we see the same trend happen with the reserve to expenditure, that's the green line. And we saw in 2022, the utmost right bottom, that the yield in 2022 was very low owing to the decline in the international financial market. 2022 was an unprecedented year for international investors. Both the stock market and the bond market fell more than 15%. You know, 1 in 50 years in the history of both equity and bond market. Our investment, importantly, we invest the fund, as I said, locally, regionally, and internationally. We could see that on the graph on the right, very well diversified across location. We also invest in different asset class. We invest in bonds, we invest in loans, we invest in equities, we invest in cash and money market. And again, that is widely spread. With regards to sectors, we invest in our domestic government, regional, international government, statutory bodies, and corporation. And also, when you invest Social Security fund, Social Security is long-term. So what you'd want is that your investment in different time buckets. So 1 to 5 years, we have a proportion, 5 to 10, 10 to 15, and 15 and more, because our liability spans 75 years. I also took a look at 2022, bring the information more recent, and the portfolio remained well diversified across different asset classes, also different location, different maturity, and among different issuers. We also want to share in terms of NIS investment in the domestic government instrument, because from us following the local developments, the conversation around NIS exposure to government NIS investment. So as at 30th June 2023, the NIS had $49.8 million invested in the government of St. Vincent and the Grenadines by way of loans and bonds. That represents 11% of the total investment portfolio. When we look at the weighted yield in terms of monies earned, rate earned, it's 4.7%. We also would look at the maturity, how long it will take for these investments to mature, or NIS to get its monies back, roughly 4.1 years. And we also look at the credit risk of the government as assigned by Moody's. It's B3, which is non-investment grade, sort of a high risk by that assessment based on Moody's international standards. So that's a snapshot with regards to NIS exposure to the government. The business of reform and actuarial reviews for the NIS have always been part of NIS process. Pension reform is a process. Just by the way we are designed in terms of pay-as-you-go, current workers to current pensioners, and also partially funded, parameters must change because parameters are a function of the demographic realities. So we conducted our first review in 1992. I mean, the first review was supposed to be in 1990, but we didn't have access to an actuary. So we did our first review in 1992. And from 1994, we started to make parametric changes to the system. In 1994, we introduced the minimum pension of $40, and an average benefit increased about 11%. 1999, we also increased benefit. And these increase in benefit, not automatic, but is basically driven by guidance of the actuary. And the increases are meant to provide inflation protection. So we did increase in 94, 99, 2002, 2005, 2008, and 2014 in terms of where benefits were increased. So the last benefits increase were in 2014. Between 2014 and now, we haven't increased any benefit in terms of that is trying to balance the financial situation of the NIS and the way you balance that, because in 2014 contribution rate increase, you could freeze in terms of increase in pension benefit. That's what we did since 2014. This is a history of the contribution rate. The contribution rate started very low, 5.5% in 1987, and that contribution rate declined in 1987 when we repealed the NPF Act and replaced with the NIS, and that moved from 10% to 5.5%. And in 2014, it was increased back to that level. So it took roughly 3 decades to increase to the NPF level. And when we compare to regional social security systems, in most cases, the contribution rate stayed the same as the National Provident Fund. And you could understand why, because the NIS is more comprehensive benefit. The National Provident Fund were lump sum payment on debt, reaching a retirement age and invalidity. So it was somewhat limited, and it really did not provide that protection for workers, because unemployment injury, there weren't anything. On sickness, nothing. So we had to provide a more comprehensive benefit that treats with the temporary loss of income and also loss of income at retirement. So the NIS, more comprehensive. We contemplate in the whole matter of the unemployment benefit to be part and parcel of our benefit suites, but we have to do in terms of a feasibility study. What was the view of the actuary on NIS financial experience? At current contribution rate and benefit provision, the actuary opined that we provide good and adequate benefit for our workers. That's one opinion. The other opinion is that these adjustments that I spoke about in 1994, 2005, 2008, 2014, those adjustments, though ad hoc, guided by the actuary provide adequate protection against inflation. And another observation by the actuary is that participation rate among the self-employed and the informal sector are very low. And when the actuary look at our investment portfolio, the actuary finds that our investment portfolio is well diversified. So that is past experience. The actuarial valuation more forward looking, the outlook. What is the financial future of the NIS? So we see the first graph, the top left, the green line, indicates that if there are no changes in contribution rate and benefit levels, the reserve will be depleted in 2034. And as I mentioned earlier, this is a partially funded program. So it's obvious at some point in the future, the fund will be depleted because that is the mechanism chosen for the financing. It's partially funded. So at some point, we expect that the reserve will be insufficient to meet the obligations. And that reserve is depleted, is projected to be depleted at current contribution rate and benefit levels simply because we project that benefit will grow if we look at the graph on the right exponentially. So the benefit trend will continue. So at the current design, the benefit will continue to grow exponentially. And we assume, we see between 2019 and 2079, the contribution rate remain fixed. That was the assumption used by the actuary. So given the current benefit levels, given the current contribution rate, it is projected that the funds will be exhausted in 2034. And that is expected because it's a partially funded program. Then the reserve as a proportion of expenditure will naturally come to zero at 2034 because the reserve there would be zero. But we're also seeing the impact of population aging. We see the number of contributors are declining. And this is a real problem that we're dealing with. This is a major driver of the cost, the ratio of workers to pensioners. Once that ratio of workers to pensioners reduces, then the cost of Social Security increases. So this is the problem that we are fighting, because at the end of the day, what you want to do as an actuary is to reduce the growth of this yellow line. So it's growing too steep and too fast. So what you want to do is to temper that growth. Once you could temper that growth, make an adjustment to the benefit design, then the next step is to determine which contribution rate would be adequate to fund this over a period of time. So we control the cost, then we treat with how we're going to finance the benefit on a forward-looking basis. So the contribution rate adjustment is secondary. The focus is how we slow down the growth of benefit. And the growth of benefit is somewhat dependent on external factors. We see the demographics there, really unfavorable for Social Security, the contributors declining, pensioners growing. And this is just a synopsis of the story I spoke there about in terms of the future of Social Security. But if we put it in words, that in 2021, we saw the total expenditure exceeding the total income. So what happened when your total expenditure exceeds your total income? In that time, you now had to use the reserve, and we partially funded. It's a hybrid finance where we say on one end, we use the contributions from workers, and on the other end, it's partially funded. So the partially funded mechanism now in play, where we're utilizing a proportion of the reserve to meet the recurrent expenditure. The fund is expected to be depleted between 2033 and 2036. Why? When you perform an actuarial review, you are performing a review 60 years into the future. High degree of uncertainty. So therefore, you have to engage in what we call a scenario analysis. You do what is best estimate, what is most likely, what is the worst case or the pessimistic case and what is the optimistic case. So between that, 2033 and 2036, the fund is projected to be depleted. Then the pay-as-you-go rate at depletion. The pay-as-you-go rate represents the cost, right, which is 18%. At 2034, that will be the cost of Social Security. So if nothing done, no reform between 2023 and 2034, then in order to meet our obligation, we would have to either increase contribution rate to 18%. All right, so that is the cost if no changes are made before 2034. And when we look at the average cost of providing this benefit over the 60-year period, the average cost raised from 18% to 22%. And that average cost in actuarial terms is basically called the general average premium. And as an actuary, you look at the average cost over the projection period, which is 60 years, which in this case is 18%, and you compare that with your contribution rate. And we see the 18% compared to our contribution rate of 10%. So that's an indication that the fund is financially imbalanced, because the cost of providing the Social Security benefits exceed the current contribution rate. So that's an indication that contribution rate should increase. Then we also look at, because this is the major driver of the cost, the ratio of contributors to pensioners. In 2019, for every one pensioner, we have 5.2 contributors. Based on projection, by 2079, for every one pensioner, we have 1.7 contributors, right? Because our population is projected to decline, and also population aging. The proportion of elderly persons relative to persons under 65 would be higher. That is what we call population aging as a result of several factors. Life expectancy is projected to improve over the projection period. The fertility rate, number of live birth per childbearing woman, expect to decline to about 1.6 something, and that is below the 2 natural replacement rate. That's a concern. And also migration. We project that outward migration would happen over that period. So that is really concerning for Social Security, a declining population and an aging population. It's important, based on these projection results, what the actuary opines in terms of our future. So at the current stage of the fund, increase in investment return would have small material impact on the reserve. The reason being because the investment income is now being used to pay the bills, and you are liquidating a proportion of the asset. So even though the return on investment increase, it would have immaterial impact on the reserve, because it's not using to build the reserve anymore. It's using to finance expenditure, right? The fund is not sustainable in the medium and the long term, right? These are the projections at current contribution rate and benefit provision. So the actuary opined that in the medium term, 12 years and more, the fund would be unsustainable, and in the long term. But currently, the fund represents about 5.2 times benefit. So we can afford to meet our obligation based on our assessment for the next 12 years. So from an assessment basis, we will say, okay, the plan is currently financially sound. It can meet its obligation. The fact that a pension fund will be depleted at a particular time in the future is expected, because by design it's partially funded. It's as if, Kenton, you're going off to study to Taiwan, it costs you $50,000. I partially fund that under the student loan program at $20,000. So Kenton program is supposed to be 5 years. By year 2, Based on that projection, the 20,000 should be depleted, right? Because I partially fund Kenton to pursue his program. So this is how we finance Social Security. If we did fully fund Social Security in the region, it would have been one, in terms of the contribution rate would have been significantly higher. Naturally, because we want to cover all the costs over the 75-year period. Then another thing we look at as actuaries is that can we productively use these reserves over the contributory period? So you'd have for private pension plan fully funded, right? Meaning when you do the projection, the assets are sufficient to meet the obligation while it's a smaller population. But the way Social Security operates is open funded and we partially fund it, right? And the actuary also opined that the outlook of NIS is inextricably linked to the demographic development, to the population, its size and its composition. It's also linked to the economy because at the end of the day, we talk about the number of workers and the number of pensioners, but the number of workers make payment to NIS via their salaries, right? Wages. So the economic and labor market developments are also critical with regards to the future of Social Security. So these are the comments. Important, what would happen at 2034 if there are no changes in contribution rate and benefit levels, which is highly unlikely, right? Because we don't want to operate a pay-as-you-go. There are some Social Security systems that operate a pay-as-you-go, meaning that there are no funds set aside for future benefit, and their reserve may be just one times the expenditure. So it's really how you choose to fund your Social Security. But in the case of NIS in Vincent, if at 2034, the NIS will continue. Exhaustion of fund or depletion of fund does not mean that we close our door. We'll still continue to operate. But based on the projection, we would only be able to cover from contribution income 67% of the benefit, right? And the benefit is a defined benefit. So you receive your benefit for life. They cannot be reduced, but they can be increased. So what would happen? We either have to increase contribution rate, or by law, the government serves as the guarantor of Social Security funds. So the government now would have to support or meet that deficit with regard to Social Security. And that is what we call the government guaranteeing in terms of the National Insurance Fund. And because it's a promise to the society, clearly it must be legislated, it must be mandatory, and it must have some government intervention. Because just as our government provide education and health, this Social Security service or benefit is provided via this statutory mechanism where the funding of it will come from workers and employers. The government also is an employer. So this is somewhat a buffer fund to ensure that the society is protected against contingency that result in loss of income. And a government typically provides this protection via two ways: the social insurance, which is the NIS, and the social assistance program. So we are operating or administering the social insurance program. What are the challenges that we face as Social Security? The demographic is a real challenge for us. The population aging. The ratio of contributors to pensioners are declining. That's a concern to Social Security. On the economic side, we have seen low and slow economic growth, the volatility of the economic development. Naturally, we have a small, open, resource challenge economy that basically dependent on international development. So it's basically vulnerable to exogenous shock that cause some of the economic volatility. And we have a narrow economic base, tourism, agriculture, and so forth and so on. The labor market, when we analyze our labor market, high informality. And Social security globally experienced challenge with regards to covering the informal sector, and also the unemployment rate is above average. The plan is also maturing, meaning when we start in 1987, excuse me, when we start in 1987, we had few pensioners. As time elapsed, we have more pensioners. So it moved from a grant base, because if you didn't have your contribution years required for pension, you will receive a grant. So in the early age, we were paying mainly grant. Now, as we mature, we're paying more pensioners. So a growing number of our pensioners. We have about 8,300 and something pensioners on our book based on the last assessment. Our plan is very generous in design, meaning we have a high replacement rate. We replace up to 60%. The current rate of replacement now is 54.5%. And it's generous relative to the low contribution rate. So we offer this comprehensive benefit program initially at a cost of 5.5, gradually increased back to 10. Even with a replacement rate of 10 international, the average replacement rate is about between 40 and 50. With the replacement rate of potentially 60 and a contribution rate of 10, that's a very generous design. So that is one of the areas we have to look into in terms of the design of Social Security. The low coverage with regard to self-employed and informal sector workers is also a concern for NIS, because by design, it's supposed to be mandatory, but it's not mandatory for the self-employed. Right? These are the foundation principles of Social Security, but it's not mandatory for self-employed. It's voluntary. And the administrative cost is relatively high. As I indicated, we're spending about 15 cents for every dollar collecting contribution income. We are transitioning from the manual operation to more digital. So we're exploring ways in which we can reduce the administrative costs, because we also at Social Security have to make some sacrifice with regards to how we make this system sustainable. What are the recommendations for consideration? And this is important now. The actuarial report will give some recommendations for policyholders' consideration and the public consideration. So the policy options for Social Security is quite narrow, right? We could either, one, adjust the financing mechanism, that's mean contribution rate or coverage. We could either deal with the benefit structure, the design, making some changes to the eligibility conditions or the benefit formula. We can also do what we call a systemic reform, where we move from a defined benefit program to a defined contribution program. So the policy options very narrow, but Social Security NIS, the recommendations basically fall along these lines. To improve financial sustainability, because we want to be able to pay our benefit in time and in full now and in the future. So that's the financial sustainability piece. We also want to enhance coverage, because this is a safety net. And we want to ensure that all workers are protected. All workers have access to this peace of mind, this financial security, this national safety net. Because when we look through in terms of our assessment with regards to the protection of workers, we see in the informal and the self-employed mainly covered under the social assistance program. But the social insurance is more comprehensive. You get covered on the short-term benefit end of the scale, you get for the employment injury, and you get long-term invalidity, death, and so forth and so on. So it's important that we provide this protection for all workers. We also have to pursue in terms of administrative efficiency. Clearly, we are managing trust funds, and we have to be prudent in the management of trust funds. And importantly, because these are trust funds, these funds are not the workers at NIS, these funds are not the government. We have to always ensure that we strengthen governance. We have to be transparent and we have to be accountable. And hence, we're here today to have this conversation in terms of how the NIS operate, and also we report our stewardship to the public. So for consideration, and I'm sure I would receive feedback from the audience here, the recommendation towards financial sustainability speak to increasing contribution rate. So what was included in the suite of recommendation is to increase contribution rate from 10% to 15% over the next 10 years. These are just options. The other was the replacement rate. Potentially at 60, you could reduce it to 55. The other one was hasten the increase in pensionable age. In 2014, we did some reform, and the pensionable age increased from 60 to 65 over a 15-year period. The actuary is recommending for consideration that we could reach 65 at 2026 instead of 2028. So with 2023 now, one option could be, okay, we're 63 now in 2023, we'll go 64 in 2024, 65 in 2025, or 64 in 2025, 65 in 2026. For instance, Grenada just passed their law, their amendment with retirement age, and they would increase, they currently at 60, they would increase 1 year each year up to 65. And there could be also adjustment to what we call the early age pension. Currently, there's a reduction factor 6% each year away from your pensionable age. So if someone, the pensionable age now is 63, if someone turns 60 and want the pension, then the pension would be adjusted by 18%, 6% each year. The consideration is that 6% can increase to 9%. So in that case, now it comes, for instead of being 18, it will be 24%. So that's another policy option in terms of from a cost standpoint. And for us, we saw that the cost really is driven in recent time by the early age pension. So you're not feeling the full impact of the increase in retirement age because a person can still take their pension, be it is adjusted, so their contributory period will be shorter because they're taking it earlier, and we start paying earlier. So that has basically impacted cost in a material way. Montserrat made some changes in 2021, and what Montserrat did was to eliminate their early pension so that they can feel the full impact of the age increase. All right, so there are different options available. This is the option promulgated by the actuary. In terms of enhancing coverage, the conversation around mandatory coverage for the self-employed workers, as you see by design, Social Security is supposed to be mandatory. So you could look at mandatory coverage for self-employed workers. We also could implement new technology. This is where we are in our digital transformation journey. We are changing our management system so that we can serve you, our customers, better from the standpoint of submitting records to NIS, payments of benefit, addressing queries, and so forth and so on. So we're currently changing our management system, and we improving contribution collection and compliance. My compliance manager is here with me, Richard Lewis. I think they're doing a fantastic job from the moral suasion standpoint. Richard will try to persuade you to pay your NIS. Then once it moves from that moral suasion, we also have our legal department that would apply different legal remedies, including garnishing of accounts, placing lien, taking magistrate court action, high court action, and so forth and so on. Because deducting contribution from workers and not paying it over is really a criminal offense, because you're breaking the law. So we have zero tolerance on that, and the compliance and legal team are working assiduously to ensure that we strengthen contribution, compliance, and collection. Also building public confidence. This one is very, very important to us. We have to ensure we manage trust fund, and the word trust means that we have to engage stakeholders. We have to build confidence into the system. The monies are the workers' monies, and we have to be transparent. And one way this is shared, the actuarial report or report is was tabled in Parliament, now a public document. Management now could upload on the website. It is available. We send to individual persons, stakeholders, the actuarial valuation report, and we will continue to publish both report and financial statements on the website, make them public documents, and be available, more importantly, to answer any questions or explain any elements within the financial statements or the actuarial reports. There's one thing, putting the report out there, and the other thing, being available for questions. And we are available here today for questions on the report. Then the guidance around policies, the investment and risk policy. Investment plays a critical role in social security financing. So the actuary recommended that we amend our investment and risk. I mean, there's so many uncertainty we're dealing with. The management has already strengthened its investment policy and its risk management policy. We have developed a draft funding policy. The funding policy is basically a roadmap how you fund the long-term cost of social security. So it's basically give you guidance of how we will meet our costs in the future. In some countries, there's automatic adjustment. So we won't be, for instance, coming and after every actuarial review, making a case for increase in contribution rate or increase in the retirement age. What you can do, you can fashion this funding policy with some automatic adjustments. So you'll say, for instance, you will move the retirement age based on life expectancy. So for instance, if life expectancy is projected to be 78 and it's increased from 77, there's a 1-year increase, you can make an adjustment to the retirement age linked to that exogenous variable. Similarly with contribution rate, you can adjust contribution rate based on the long-term average cost of Social Security. I mentioned based on the 11th report, the gap, the general average premium is 18%. Let us say for the 12th valuation, the gap now we assess it at 19%. It increased by 1%. So we could say for every 1% increase, the contribution rate could increase by a quarter. So there, it's like you put Social Security on autopilot. So they move based on these exogenous variables, another function of the recommendations of the actuary, and the adjustments are made as they make now in terms of on an ad hoc basis and through the parliament and policymakers to make these decisions. So that enhanced governance. We've seen, for instance, Seychelles, and we have led in terms of the whole trust of the funding policy from a draft standpoint. I know Grenada has one in draft as well, not activated. Also, Turks and Caicos Island just drafted their funding policies. Basically give like guidance in terms of how we meet our obligation going forward. So we have fashioned one, and also NIS would be having a panel discussion on pension reform in August 30th. I'm inviting everyone. And we carve out a section to speak on the funding policy. And our local actuary, in terms of Mrs. Judith Vera, will take that piece in terms of the governance-centric approach to funding Social Security. So you would hear more about that from Mrs. Judith Vera. The other element is how we improve administrative efficiency. From management standpoint, we have advanced in terms of how we are managing the Social Security, in terms of addressing the costs. We've seen in the last 3 years or so, cost has trended downwards and will continue to trend downwards. We embark on digital transformation as a tool to really drive costs downwards as well, and to serve you, the public, better. Importantly, those are the parametric reform, but how we as a business going to do things differently? How are we going to transform? So our strategic priorities are around 4 key areas. You want to continue to build public confidence, public trust, to have this relationship. We also, customer service is key to us in terms of fostering, customer-centric services. Coverage is important. We want everyone to be under the social security umbrella so that they can be protected against difficult times. And resource management will continue to sharpen the tools of management and staff with regards to capacity building efforts and also digital transformation to make it easy to do business at social security. It's important also for us to not just look domestically, but regionally. So I'm sharing in terms of some social security systems across the region and their historical performance so that we can have some benchmarking to do. And these 4 countries were selected because these 4 countries share the same actuary as NIS St. Vincent. So we know the methodology will be somewhat similar, and it's afford a better comparison. So we've seen that through the region, that in case of Montserrat, you see that red line trending upwards. That's the cost, that's the expenditure, and you see contribution rate. So the red line for Montserrat is trending upwards. Anguilla, no different, trending upwards. Grenada, no different, trending upwards. And all expenditure rate exceed the contribution rate with somewhat flat. And St. Kitts, same, trending upwards. And importantly, what you can see there, Montserrat started at 6%, then reached then 9% at 2005. You see Grenada started at the 8% and reached 11% in 1999. Anguilla, always 10% from NPF. St. Kitts started at 10, then increased to 11. St. Kitts is one of the countries that did reform at inception. They increased the age from 60 to 62, and they increased the contribution rate to 11% early, and it has paid dividend. However, the challenges of the demographic means that the cost now is outside our control by and large. So we see in the case of Montserrat, this assessment is as of 2020. It's projected that their funds will be exhausted in 2026. We all have the partially funded mechanism, but Montserrat had done some reform implemented in 2021. Right, so they did their reform like 5 years before fund depletion also. Anguilla is estimated 2037. They are having dialogue with regards to possible reform. Grenada has advanced. They share same data as St. Vincent. Actually, Grenada, Barbados, and St. Vincent share date of 2034. Grenada has taken swift action. Their contribution rate will move to 15%. Their retirement age will move to 65. And St. Kitts, 2040, St. Kitts has started their reform conversation, and they are contemplating increasing rate and age as well. And I did an assessment in terms of the OECS and Barbados, and what we see is that one fund, as I mentioned, Montserrat in the 2020s, we have 4 would fund depletion in 2030s, 2 2040s, 2 2050s, and 1 in the 2060s. So these funds are partially funded. We are at different stage in terms of making reform changes. But a synopsis, just for our digestion, we look at Anguilla there, the 10% since 1982, and we see here St. Vincent has one of the lowest contribution rates at 10%. And we see the ages now are trending to 65 within the ECCU space outside Barbados, which is at 67. And I think there was a ministerial statement to go to 68. So this is where we are in the region. And we do work collaboratively in the region on this business of social security reform For instance, I've been to Barbados, I've been to St. Kitts, helping with the whole message and the education of Social Security and the reform, because we have to collaborate. It is an issue that impacts all of us and everywhere, because you already read internationally what's happening in other countries, France, the US. Reform is everywhere. The issue of the demographic challenge is everywhere. So in conclusion, the National Insurance Fund is the only source of retirement income for many Vincentians. That's the reality. From our internal assessment, about 80% of our pensioners receive NIS as the only source of retirement income. So that is how critical Social Security is to life and livelihood. We are not in a crisis, clearly. As you see, that's the design of Social Security. Fund exhaustion would always be at a particular date in the future. We face medium-term and long-term challenges, mainly because of on the demographic side of things. We see population aging in terms of impacting the region, and it is exacerbated by the fact that these international countries that are facing population aging are softening their immigration policies. So we have seen what we call high international labor mobility, where a lot of migration now happening to these countries for job opportunities and so forth and so on. The population aging is real, the economic uncertainty. We saw COVID, inflationary pressure in 2022, the war and its impact on the supply of goods and services. So we really need to think we are in a current situation, but this doesn't define in terms of who we are. We are a trust fund set up to provide protection for Vincentian, and we really have to think generationally, because Social Security is somewhat like a susu hand. I'm making contribution now. My mother is receiving benefits. My daughter is in secondary school. When I retire, she'll be making her contribution. Just a formalized kind of susu hand, because a pay as you go. So we really have to think generationally and not situationally. I mean, the actual report has now been publicized, so some of the information are fresh and new to many, and there may be concerns, and rightly so, but it's our responsibility to explain what this means and what we're doing to ensure that the system is sustainable. So asking for the media professional support in terms of securing our future together. The business of Social Security is a national issue. You heard me with regards to the number of Vincentians, retired Vincentians depending on Social Security as their only means of income in retirement. COVID-19 also gave us a glimpse of what would happen to those persons that are not covered by Social Security. The government had to respond to the need, for instance, of the sailors and so forth and the informal sector workers by providing a temporary unemployment benefit, because the loss of income meant that there was no other source to support their daily living. So that just gives us a glimpse of what would happen in the future. And when we review in terms of the social assistance list, it's about 2,600 based on the last report that was furnished to us. If we can get more persons under the social insurance, because this is your right, it's mandatory, and you will be protected not only for an income at retirement, but it's very comprehensive. The whole short-term spectrum, the maternity, the sickness, the employment injury, the death, the invalidity, the employment injury. So it's a protection that provides workers with a peace of mind. So that's the presentation that I really wanted to share with the media, and I'm now open for any questions. I know the journey was a bit long, but it's important for us to set the context so that we can understand what we are treating with and Now I stand ready for any questions, any comments. How can we partner with regards to, promoting social security literacy locally, regionally, and internationally? Because in this space now, our articles and our work does not only expose to Vincentian, but to the wider world. So the floor is open now for any comments, any questions on our operations and also the 11th Actuarial Valuation Report. I really thank you for your attention, and I open now for questions.
I already represented the media also today. It's public interest. You mentioned that there are 8,300 pensioners registered with the NIS. And let's assume they are on fixed income. Pension reform has been on the books now for quite some years. Since 2014, I think. And it was even debated in the parliament sometime back as a bill. The parametric reforms, the NIS. Now, every time there's a debate on pension, we hear about the actuarial reports and stuff. So can you say today with any certainty that the actuarial reports done so far have produced any positive indications for an increase in pensions for pensioners to meet the rising cost of living today?
Right, so the 11th Actuarial Report, actually one of the recommendations is for no increase in pension, right? That's the 11th report. The 12th report may say something differently, because from the assessment and the actuary made the comment that the benefit and the increases adequately cover the inflation faced to date to 2019. So the 11th Actuarial Report was explicit and recommend no pension increase because, well, it's a financial balancing act. Because as you see, there were an increase from 94 to 2014, right, with a low contribution rate. So to create this financial balance, the actuary recommend that at this time there will be no increase in pension. But that was as of 2019. I'm not sure what the 2012 actuarial report will say, but we witness in terms of unprecedented rise in inflation. So the actuary, after the thorough assessment, would give his or her recommendation, but the actuary will just give an opinion and a guide. The administrators or policy makers can adopt recommendations outside the actuarial report, right? But with consultation with the actuary. Because, for instance, we know the experience in St. Vincent. That is why consultation is important. And the pensioners, for instance, are asking for an increase. So a sensitivity assessment can be done in terms of, okay, what if pension increased by X%? What will be the impact on cost? What if that? What if contribution? So those analysis I show would be done by the actuary. He would be on the ground and he would listen to the concerns and the views of the public. The core is to ensure that we have an adequate and sustainable income protection program. Yes, go ahead.
That's 104.3 FM. Well, listening to everything that was being discussed and stated this morning, I realized that we're in a precarious position in terms of the rate of contributions meeting the payout. So my question is, based on that, wouldn't it be wise to the NIS to shed any unnecessary weight that is carried that it does not need to carry? For instance, the paying out of $500 to each student who passes the second GCE, which is not really an investment, but it's basically a handout to people who are not contributed as yet. Meanwhile, you're struggling to balance the books and deal with the beneficiaries who you actually supposed to be covering, as in you were supposed to be dealing with them primarily and their retirement and their benefits and whatever else, injuries and so forth. And then to what tune is this number affecting the fund and the resources that NIS provides on an annual basis? Then furthermore to that, the contributors, they can get an increase, but there are non-contributors who are on, and they are getting benefits also. And I know you might want to move towards making it mandatory for non-contributors, like self-employed people, to contribute, but at the same time, we're still paying out to people who haven't contributed. So wouldn't it be wise to make those adjustments to reduce that expenditure, along with the other plans to help you fiscally balance, like going digital and so forth, instead of just speaking primarily about contribution rates and increasing the pension age to help offset some of the costs?
All right, so thank you for your question. The real issue facing Social Security, as I mentioned, is the demographic side. Is the expenditure rate, the maturing element, the pension. That is the long-term challenge and the medium-term challenges that we face in terms of from a pension side of things. So that is why the actuarial report will focus on addressing the material cost factors. That's what an actuarial report does, is look at how sustainable the system would be. What are the major drivers of cost? The major drivers of cost for Social Security is the pension, right? And that the cost of that is increasing exponentially. So you want to control that going forward. We can see from this graph with regards to administrative expense where it is, right? So you're right, it has an impact, but not a material impact. In terms of we, NIS, and what we do, clearly we are fiduciaries, and we would want to do anything that will benefit the contributors and the beneficiaries. That's why I mentioned about being administratively efficient. So programs that will cause depletion of your resources, right, and be it immaterial, we'll still try to control all costs and be prudent with regards to the management of the resources. But the real issue for us as Social Security, not that we're ignoring those issues, is on the cost side of things as it relates to benefit expenditure. That's why when you pick up any actuarial report, what you will see, the focus is on the long-term trajectory. That's the main issue that we focus in. So it clearly states that we are unsustainable in the medium and long term. When you look at the moving factors in the medium and the long terms are really pension, and that is why we focus a lot with regard to those adjustments, because those would bring the system into financial balance. The administrative expense and so forth, 15 cents of the cost you mentioned in terms of I mentioned in terms of our social and economic utility. We make certain contribution as part of our corporate social responsibility. We do different donations and so forth. Clearly, we'd look at those discretionary expenses in terms of how we can reduce these discretionary expenses. You mentioned also with regard to the non-contributory pensioners. Well, that was established in the 1990s. And the thinking of the actuary at that time was that there are this proportion of workers that contributed to building the local economy, but did not get a chance to contribute to NIS. And they offered that protection to those non-contributory pension. And they were predominantly banana farmers. And we know our economy was built on the back of farmers. And Social Security has a social and economic responsibility to contribute to economic development as well as contribute to the social development as well. But that program clearly is currently closed and has been closed since 2014. So those persons receive the benefit is for life. It's a pension, right? So they would receive it for life. So that will phase out based on the life expectancy of the last pensioner. So clearly, the non-contributory program is closed and has been closed since 2014. There are no new entrants. What we have, we will continue to meet those expenditure because they are pensioners and they contributed to building the economy that really provide the basis for Social Security. And those were mean tested in terms of the beneficiaries as well, and it's a function of age. So those were the economically challenged older person. And you can appreciate, as I mentioned, that 80% of persons receive NIS as their only source of income in retirement. So clearly those persons were below the poverty line. And we lift a proportion of persons above the poverty line. And that's the whole spirit of Social Security in 2020 with COVID. We were challenged then. But our workers were in significant financial hardship. Persons lost a job for no fault of theirs. Due to COVID-19, we had to think through and balance between financial sustainability and the social solidarity. And we introduced a temporary unemployment benefit program that the workers benefit and those persons had no income during that period. So we could have invested $3 million. It was well designed such that it won't cause any long-term impact on our Social Security. But at least the members who were contributing to NIS lost the job of no fault of theirs. So we provided that assistance as a part of our poverty alleviation initiative. And that wasn't only offered by St. Vincent Social Security. That was offered by other Social Security. So these are principles of Social Security. As I mentioned earlier, we want to ensure the funds are safety. We want to ensure that we receive a competitive yield. We want to ensure that we have sufficient liquidity to pay our bill. And we have a social and economic responsibility as well. But that is secondary for us, to us, in terms of securing the pension is key. But clearly, we will do administratively every and anything possible to ensure that we are operating prudently.
So, but as then grasp the concept of the pay out to the students and the reasoning behind that, because I will understand the banana farms. They contributed. The students have not contributed as yet. And in my opinion, and in the opinion of many others who have had discussions, this year is unnecessary to draw from the pensions to pay out at the end of every year. School year, when the exams are finished, $500 to each student. It is what is there to be gained from doing such a thing when there's programs with social welfare, mobilization, and other institutions that would step up to the plate to fulfill those financial requirements, which aren't really requirements because they never existed up until it was decided to be done. Everybody here did their exams. Did you ever get a payout of $500 to pass it? Was it something that was stipulated when you went to school? None of us were. So the thing is, we can't grasp the importance of it and why it should continue when the NIS is in such precarious positions financially.
Right. As I mentioned, NIS is sound, right? We have to make changes in terms of, for the long term, we're seeing some challenges. That program, as I mentioned, is part of the whole corporate social responsibility. It's a discretionary program, and clearly it can be stopped. We provide also loans to under the economic disadvantaged student loan as well for students to benefit. We make investment in housing and health and so forth. So the education element is one of the social or corporate social responsibility in terms of the students. This year, we actually sponsored the exercise books for secondary school as a marketing such strategy. So on schools that have their own exercise book, will have the NIS logo on it. So we make a 10% contribution because we really want to get to the youth. So we're dealing, yes, with the pensioners, the workers, but we also want to appeal to the youth. But I hear your concern is something management would give consideration to. This is not an entitlement. It's not like a pension under the NAP. It's a discretionary, right? So discretionary meaning you would relook your priorities and your ability to meet, and you can make changes to the same because it's discretionary expense, right? But it's part of us, the corporate social responsibility giving back.
I think for all intents and purposes, that one should really be considered to be cut.
Eliminate.
Yeah, because
Thank you very much for your recommendation. This is why we're having this conversation. Different views. And your views are well accepted and well appreciated. Yes.
They also put in section in this paper. I just have one brief question. They've been hearing about a lot of recommendations that have been made. And of course, we could, in the last Parliament, the Minister of Finance, that was saying that, well, it's in a position that things will have to be started in 2024. The question to you then is, has discussion started yet in terms of those recommendations that have been made, what can we expect to see in terms of NIS reform?
Right. So with regards to recommendations of the 11th Actuarial Report, they've been discussed because they're typical guidance. We are conducting the 12th valuation report because the timeline, let us say 2024, you'd want the recommendations to be informed by more recent numbers. So the 12th report is due as at 31st December 2022. So we should get that report before the end of the year. And that report now would include the recommendations. I don't think they will deviate significantly from these, but I can't speak on it because the numbers would inform what recommendation. And also the views of the public are also important for us to share with the actuary in terms of some of the concern, because there's a suite of recommendations that would have different impact on the plan, right? So if, for instance, we have a recommendation that is a pain point for Vincent, and we look at, okay, we can achieve our objective, but we probably can make a change somewhere else because this is a pain point. And this is why Social Security and reform really leads to social dialogue, because we want to hear from the people. Because this is not just an academic exercise where we take the data, push it into a model, these numbers, and actually, you could make changes. Increase that sustainable. But it doesn't operate like that. You want to hear the views of stakeholders, because this is a bread and butter issue. These are lives and livelihoods. So we want to ensure that views are being considered. There could be a case where a particular view, let us say, may not be able to carry, simply because if we take that view, we won't address the problem that we are facing. So the focus is to make this system sustainable, right? And there are different options in terms of making it sustainable. The public views about the options are important. So hence, NIS is having the consultations with different stakeholders so that we can get the views, because the views from last year, earlier this year, are documented so that the actuary can take into consideration the opinion of the public. And that's why Social Security typically adopt a social dialogue approach, meaning all stakeholders. And we are doing this at NIS.
Good morning, Ken to the Chance Services and Greater Media Corporation. I start with my colleague left off. What I want to know first is what are the implications of another actuarial review on the reforms that are being considered? would the recommendations of the 11th review be still valid if they are not included in the 12th?
Yes, yes. Basically, the recommendations that in the 11th basically could be valid, right? So, for instance, let us say the 12th review comes out, and the highly unlikely no recommendations around increase in age, all right? The 11th review speak to age in two strands. One, the 11th review speak to age going to 67. The 11th review speak to age staying at 65 at a short. Different options. So let us say the 12th now speak to age going to 67, right? The policymakers can adapt the sort of hasten the age to 65. So because the reform options, as I said, is very 4 buckets, really. So it'll be those variables because the issue around the design, which is the benefit. So you want to look at, okay, the qualifying conditions, then you want to look at the benefit formula. These are the possible changes you can make. It's the degree of the change now that could vary. Then on the financing structure, could only call for an increase in terms of the rate from a financing structure. What level now could vary, depends on the numbers. And also the mandatory coverage is also essential part of Social Security, given it's mandatory in nature. So they're very live recommendations. And we have seen across the region, most countries went for, in case where retirement age was 60, gone to 65. Grenada, Montserrat, Barbados going to 68, rate increase, Montserrat, and that. So those policy options are there for consideration.
Just to be clear, once the 12th review is published or is handed to the NIS, the 11th is no longer valid.
Right, the 11th won't be really valid because
so you're looking at the recommendations in the
12th, yeah, that would inform, yes.
So all these discussions that we're having would one due in about 4 months' time. Are they then moved?
Right. No, they're not. And that is why if we go back, Kent, and I mentioned the reason why we're here. Because the recommendations from the 11th more than likely will come over to the 12th, maybe in varied degree and number. Right? They're still important with regards to informing the 12th recommendation. The consultation is necessary. So Vincentians are aware of the options possible to be implemented, and which more than likely will be the options for the 12th review. So the views now are critical.
Why is it that the administrative expenses are so high, 15%, and how do you propose to reduce it?
Right, so the administrative expense over contribution income is 15 cents. So you could approach. We improve in terms of contribution collection. That's one end. And the other element of the admin expense that, well, let me strip depreciation because that's included in the 15 cents. Let me strip that. So it's down to 12 cents because we own a building, so depreciation must be part and parcel of cost, right? But let me take out that. So when we look at it in terms of from an admin expense, we operate in very lean in terms of from a cost-wise. What we need to do now is go to digital transformation so that you'll make it more efficient because a lot of paperwork and so forth. Make it more efficient. And also, once you go digital, you cover in terms of access. Your contribution base will be wider, right? And reach for the self-employed so that admin expense over contribution income could reduce. So we're approaching it from a strengthening contribution collection, growing contribution, because the absolute, to be honest, cost of our admin is prudent, to be honest. It's not excessive, right? If we strip the monetary cost of our admin expense, when we take as a percentage is on the bit high, and the manual operation of NIS could be one of the reasons why it's high, because I see in different countries, like the larger the country, the lower the rate is. Like the Trinidad, the Barbados, because the contribution base. But like the St. Vincent, the St. Lucia, the Montserrat, the Anguilla, it's on the high side in terms of from a cost perspective.
Can you explain what you mean when you say the NIS's liability spans 75 years? I'm not sure.
Right. So the projections for the 12th, the 11th was over 60-year period. So the 12th now, we're going to do that projection over 75 years. But NIS is perpetual. But for the purpose of the review, it will be 75 years. Because the best practice now change, moving from 60 to 75. Some pension funds even go as at 100 years. So we're moving from 60 to 75 so that we could have a better look into the future and see whether or not this costs sort of a plateau or level off in terms of the expenditure rate. We want to see how that plateau in the longer years. So that's why we're moving from 60 to 75.
Okay, please correct me if I'm wrong on this, right? In order for someone to qualify for pension, they must meet certain criteria in terms of contribution, number of contribution. How does the NIS respond to the view that somebody might not have reached the absolute number required, but they've made a substantial contribution? Do they still get a pension? And if not, why not give them a pension, but at the level of their contribution?
Okay, right. So basically, let us look at it. The design, because I'm going back, the design. So pension is, we know when we're going to retire, right? So the qualifying condition now will be set on a longer term, right? So to qualify for pension now is 13 years. Eventually we reach in 15 years to qualify. So therefore we operate in for 36 years. So what we ensure is that you have sufficient period to contribute to be entitled to a pension, right? If you're not entitled to a pension, you'll be entitled to a grant. If you have less, like 12 years, well, let me say no, 9 years and less, because we still have what we call the partial pension. So even though we increase the number of years of pension to 13 years, persons that acquire 10 years will still get a partial pension adjusted. But anything less than 10, you will get a grant. And if you have less than 1 year contribution, then you get a refund. So anything you put in NIS is yours. You either will get the refund if it's less than a year. If it's less than 10 years, you get a grant, a lump sum payment, or you would receive a pension. Now let's look at the case now of death or invalidity. Invalidity is uncertain. So to qualify for invalidity pension is 3 years and not 10. Simply because we want to provide that protection for young workers. Death, in terms of survivor's pension, is after 3 years. The widower and children will be entitled to a pension. So it's basically under design, because retirement is encouraging people to save. And we want what you would have there, if we kind of relax, is that people game in the system. Because we also have a minimum pension as well, that we provide that income protection for persons whose pension fall below $70. So it's financially designed, right, to make the system sustainable, because short contribution and entitled to a pension really increases generosity. That could happen, but the only mean the cost, the contribution rate now would have to go up. Because what you'll do now is say, if somebody could receive a pension of lower years, then we run the numbers how that will look like, and you charge a contribution rate accordingly. But typically, in terms of international standards, 10 to 15 years usually be the requirement for pension, because pension is for life. So you're getting that under the long-term benefit, right? Unlike short-term, that your contribution is less than the 10 years.
So the partial pension, is that the same as the grant?
No, the partial pension is a pension adjusted. Yeah, for life. For life. But it's reduced, let us say now it's 13 years. You get 10 years, and that is designed because you have some seasonal workers. that what we do, we do the adjustment, calculate the number of years, get the pension, then we adjust it by the ratio of the 10 over the 13 to ensure fairness.
How would you respond to a question like, the NIS owns the juicy building, right? And I think the NIS, I don't know if the building is rented out. I know there's a car park there. How do you respond to questions about of what benefit to the NIS is such an asset?
Right. So NIS currently owns the juicy building, right? And the NIS has plans in terms of its development. So it's a non-income generating assets now, but it's capital appreciation. Naturally, there are two ways of asset could be either the price increase or there's some income. So NIS has planned in terms of the conversion from a non-income to an income generation. Where we are with that, we just send out RFPs for design and construction supervision. So we're going to create a NIS complex there for the purpose of renting, and we're going to do an arrangement where we build to suit arrangement, because we have two solid potential tenants that we are talking to now.
I just have two more questions. What are the legal implications of changes to benefits of people who entered the system with certain expectations?
Right. So there are no legal implication for NIS or the state because we started a refund. It's according to the change in statute laws. So the laws could change. Unlike a contractual plan, like for instance, if I'm part of a pension plan, an employer's pension plan, I sign a contract. So I govern by the contractual terms. But Social Security is a statutory body. So basically statutory rules. So it's offered, and that's why it's a fund that is offered by a society, and it must be legislated for it to be Social Security. And that's why the design is such that it's partially funded and the pay-as-you-go. Okay, changes can be made in to different parameters, just to ensure that they receive the pension. So there's no legal implication.
And my final question, how do you respond to the view that some of these discretionary benefits, I think we call them?
Expenses?
Yeah, expense. Well, that's what I had and I wasn't so. So how do you respond to the view that some of these discretionary expenses are influenced more by partisan politics than any other consideration?
Right. So that's an opinion. Right? So that opinion, I'm not sure what or who shaped that opinion. But clearly in terms of when decisions are made by the NIS, you have an independent board that making that decision. So decisions like that are basically made by the board. There's a policy position that's a board position. Then you could have decisions now that are made by the head of operations. Depends. And these are more mainly for the operational decision. That because we operate under the trust of the social and economic utility. And I'm not sure what formulates that opinion, but under that trust, it means that there can be discretion around like making donations to individuals, to companies, or so forth. That's always within that sort of a board realm in terms of board responsible for policy. So there could be discretionary expenses coming from policy. There could be discretionary expenses coming from the administrators. Like for instance, a football team want to travel, apply to NIS for some donation and so forth. Those decisions are made by the director and staff. All right. But we have to ensure that when decisions are made, that they're responsible decisions. So that would be my response to a question like that.
Just to follow up on my colleague's question there, how, for people, since it has become an issue now, how would the NIS explain or justify this decision to the public? What informed, in other words, that decision?
So which decision?
To give the money to the students after they graduate.
So the money to the student after they graduate, how would we justify that
How do you explain?
going forward or historically?
No, historically and going forward.
Right, so historically, as I said, that came under the umbrella of the social and economic utility of our objective, and that basically is discretionary, and it was made mainly under the trust of the education contribution in terms of giving that support to students. That's how that came about, because it's the social utility spans health, spans education, spans housing, spans culture. So different areas NIS gives contribution.
Why the decision to give it to, if they've graduated, I'm not sure your students anymore, rather than people who are actually pursuing their education? Let's say, why give it to people who graduated Form 5 rather than to give it to people who, let's say, or students who pass to go to Form 4, or once you make it to Form 5, we'll give it to you. That's what I'm trying to do.
Okay, so there are different factors, because there's that decision being made for basically incentive in terms of achievement, academic achievement. But also those students who are going on, you have the National Student Loan Program that provides that benefit in terms of those students who are going off to study and so forth and so on. So that's more like an academic incentive for persons to aspire to do very well in their exams. But it's under the education trust, one could bucket it.
I had a question. I think you briefly mentioned this.
Right.
There's the non-payment of by some employers of the contribution. Is that only the problem?
The non-payment,
Yeah.
it is, our compliance rate among the formal sector is good. There's some challenge around the constructions and so forth. We are seeing some improvement as NIS heighten and strengthen and tighten its efforts in terms of the collection and applying the legal remedies of the Act. We're seeing some improvement with regards to contribution compliance. So efforts are there, and we see in the informal sector, we still have some challenges. So for our by and large, the formal sector, we have seen some improvements.
What is the percentage threshold of the NIS exposure to government?
The threshold exposure to government we set at 20%.
What is it currently?
11%. Yeah, to central government. So you would have cap in terms of exposure to different sectors.
20%.
20. So we now at 11.
You know, it's more than 11.
We now expose at 11.
I missed one of the questions, right? Why should self-employed people contribute to the NIS, or why would they be willing to contribute when they do not get the same level of benefits, such as sickness benefit? I think the last discussion we had, that's one of the things that I got.
Sickness or employment injury. Yeah. But
if a self-employed person is ill.
Yeah, there's sickness benefit. Yeah. But the employment injury, they're not covered, neither do they pay for it. That is why for self-employed, the rate is 9.5% and not 10. So that employment injury that was introduced in 1997 is a 0.5%.
Ricardo Wilson and this series, I'm unsure on a few issues, so
Right.
I have 2 or 3 issues I'm trying to clarify. Right? One, during the COVID, I know there were benefits that were offered to some members of the society. I think sailors
Yeah.
were covered under this. One, if sailors, would they actually contribute? Is there a structured something set up for them to contribute? And if not, I mean, they received benefits. How does, because I know you mentioned that contributions from certain sectors are some of the concerns.
Right.
How are we? And I said we because I mean the National Insurance Service is
It's all of us,
a
yes.
national program. How are we working towards getting that sector of society to actually pay contributions, because there are Vincentians and in some instances they earn more than Vincentians who are at home, and we've seen they've received benefits. So, I mean, is there any work in that regard?
Right. So they have received benefit, but not from NIS. They've
Oh.
received benefit from government. Because what NIS did was just to administer the benefit for the government, simply because we have a well-developed administrative payment system. So it was easy for us to assist the government in terms of that. They did not receive any benefits from the NIS. We benefited from getting the names and the data set, and our communication unit now is working with them via moral suasion to get them to register with the NIS. We have seen some register. We're not where we want to be, but we would be relentless in terms of getting them to be covered and to be protected. I mean, from any contingencies resulted in loss of income.
Okay. And my next question was clarification again, because I was in and out for a lot of this year with some medical issues.
Yes.
Someone mentioned the announcement by the minister in Parliament. I think it was for a possible 15% increase to 15%. Because as I said, I'm not sure. Now that we are waiting on the 12th Actuarial report, is that 15% set in stone? Because from my understanding of what I heard people speaking about it, but they said I was out, right? So I'm not sure if the 15% is already agreed, or what we're doing now and the consultations to come, if they're going to affect that number in any way.
Okay, right. So the minister presented the 11th Actuarial report. Just what the numbers and the recommendation in that report. There was no decision. The minister has a legal responsibility to table the report, and the report was tabled. There's no decision with regards to the contribution rate. But these are the options or the recommendations that the actuary suggested. Yes, yes.
There are foreigners who work and contribute to the NIS. Are they also entitled to the same refund or grant? Should they not exceed that 13 years back?
Right. So yes, they are. They are. Once you're a member of NIS, you are entitled to whatever your contributions allow you to. If, as I indicated, if you have less than 50 weeks, you get a refund. If you have 50 to 499, you get a grant. If you have between 500 and in this case 650, you get a partial pension. If you have 650 or more, you get a pension.
Just finally, piggybacking on what the girl over there asked, right? Let's say I'm a foreigner, but it doesn't have to be a foreigner.
Right. Yeah.
Somebody's working in sometimes they contribute into the NIS, right? And for whatever reason they decide to move overseas. Are there any programs, structures in place for them to continue paying, making their contribution so that they'll actually get their pension at the end of whenever they retire, even if they're not in state?
Yes, absolutely. If you move within the CARICOM, we have what we call the CARICOM reciprocal agreement. So you move and don't lose. If you move from St. Vincent to Barbados, you continue contributing to Barbados NIS. You don't have to contribute to St. Vincent NIS. No, hold on. I'm not finished. You continue to contribute to Barbados NIS. If on retirement now, what you would have is a totalization. So St. Vincent will calculate the number of years you work in St. Vincent, Barbados will calculate the number of years, and both NIS will pay you a pension. So you move, but you don't lose in the CARICOM. In Canada, we have a similar reciprocal agreement, Canadian reciprocal agreement. In the US and UK, we have what we call the voluntary program, where we are encouraging Vincentians in the diaspora to continue to contribute to Social Security. So that's the voluntary, get protection on debt and retirement, so forth.
But whatever you want to contribute here and there, as in, I'm hoping that I get it, because I mean, there are people who get their pensions from whatever country they used to live when they return home, they're retired. So whatever I decide, I'm just asking, I'm not trying to be difficult, right?
No, that's fine.
Asking if I want to continue paid my contributions at home in St. Vincent and Grenadines. Even while I'm working, let's say in America, England, Alaska, wherever it is.
Yeah, the mechanism, yes. We set up a mechanism for that payment, with the banking system. Clearly. Right. And we also receive lump sums, say for 6 months and so forth and so on. Yeah, so we have the voluntary contribution that would allow outside the CARICOM space.
Quick question.
Yes.
I have a question, but I want to hear yours first, because mine will piggyback off of yours. Okay, let me piggyback off of his previous. So Hannah John, Agency for Public No, 2 questions. First question is, in the likelihood that we do increase the percentage contribution, will that be a sudden increase or gradual? Don't answer that. Second question, just for scale and obviously transparency. 2 numbers I would like to just have in my mind. The average annual contribution, average annual pension, if you have that figure available, and total of the 500 contribution to students, those 2 figures I would like that.
Right. I would have to get back to you with those figures. I don't have them with me at this time. Yeah, but I will get back to you in terms of the numbers, the quantity, and both quantity in terms of the value of the payment and also numbers who benefited from the programs and pensioners, clearly.
But my first question.
With the gradual. Well, typically you would have, in terms of gradual increase in contribution. I mean, I've seen that over the space, the recommendation of the actuaries for a gradual increase in contribution. Yeah. So I can see us following that gradual path. And if you look at the 2014 measures, it's mainly step up gradual. Yeah. Because you don't want to create a shock to the system. So it's definitely would be gradual, or we call phased in approach.
In terms of my question, different parts, but one thing I was paying attention to is that in your explanation about the payouts to the students and the way those matters are decided on with the board, seeing that it's a societal fund, basically, and the society is paying into it, and we're all affected, whether it is successful or it fails, God forbid. Why aren't there more mechanisms for public input in decisions like those? Because if it's discretionary, I would think it would be fundamentally, more reassuring to the public to know that we have a voice in where our monies are being spent. Whether you're giving it away to students $500 at a time for passing an exam, or you decided to sponsor a team to go travel overseas, as you said. You know what I mean? Why we're not more public consultations and more public input when it comes to matters of that nature, if it's discretionary?
Right. It's discretionary in terms of with the administrators and the board. In terms of where public consultation, this is a public consultation. So we are at a public consultation. You're expressing a view on a matter, and your views are well taken. If we have these decisions I make every day, is a well-run, transparent, financial and social institution. So we won't come to the public every day. There's no institution that run professionally that will come to a public every day for discretionary expenses. We guided by certain policy framework. We adhere to the principles that I mentioned in terms of acting good faith, in terms of acting in the best interest of contributors and beneficiaries, in terms of being prudent and with care and diligence, and those decisions are made because we are fiduciaries. When we come to the public, as we are now having discussion, then persons could share the different views. You have shared your views, which are well taken.
But fundamentally, right, that sounds as if it's we do, and then if you complain later, then so be it. When you could have a discussion, or you don't necessarily have to say, okay. For instance, right, even when I'll give you a perfect example of what I mean. In institutions such as the United States government, where they have the electoral college, right? And they're dealing with social issues and so forth, and budgets on a massive scale, much more massive than that of the NIS. There are more members who are directly involved in public affairs than just a board per se. Because a board could be made up of people who have already retired or people who are financially more solid than the members who are contributing. So what might necessarily affect them or may not affect them, might affect us on a daily basis. So even when you spoke about the non-increase of pensions going forward for people who might be feeling a financial pinch now, and you say you all have to reassess that. The fact that monies can just be given by the board on their discretion, it is not relevant to the financially challenging times that we're facing now, because their situation or their reality might be far different than the general society. As you say, 80% of intentions are basically depending on the NIS. How many of them are below the poverty line? And are any of the board members are below the poverty line? So their perspective might differ from that of the public. That is why I think it's fundamentally more so to have public consultations when you're not dealing with things of a nature in terms of a loan, where monies have to be paid back. If it's money is being given out, I think the contributors should have a say in how the money is distributed and if it is given out or not.
Yeah, typically for a well-run company, you would have policies around that where you will say, okay, you do budget every year, and you would have a maximum in which you'll distribute to that. You could share to the public in terms of, okay, your donation budget going to be X amount, but you won't say, okay, I'm going to give A donation, a B donation, C. These are sort of a operational and sort of a non-material sort of a decision. So from a policy-making standpoint, that is why, in terms of when we talk about retirement age, when we talk about these big policy issues of the design, there's a system now set up to get the public views. But for those operational matter, you typically have good and sound policies and guidelines in terms of informing those decisions. So you won't have an administrative expense of that nature. But also, remember, as professionals, we have ethical responsibilities. And as fiduciaries, you'll be governed by those principles. As I say, due care, diligence, and all that.
But as a statutory body, laws will be changed, so you're not legally affected, either which way by the decisions you make. So it's left up to conscience, and it's left up to one's perspective. So if one's perspective differs from that of the general public,
Yeah.
then what might be right for them might be wrong for us, might be detrimental to us. Yeah. But they see it as something normal and something good.
Right. So it's important for us to say how we define public. Because the public may have a different position from you. This is your opinion. The public may have a different opinion than you. How do we determine what is public? Are we going through a survey that we have each member of the public to do it, and we do that every time you have an expenditure? It won't be practical and efficient. Because you're not the public. You're a member of the public. But you could have a different view than everybody here. Yes, right.
Would it be safe to say that the NIS realizes funds from investments and contributions?
Yes, we hybrid contributions and investments.
Would it also be safe to say that from profit profits made from investments, students' money can be paid rather than contribution.
Right. So funds are fungible. Right. So I believe my brother speaking on the funds. So when we collect 20 million, let us say 15 million contribution, 5 million investment. We would, let us say we spend 1 million. Funds are fungible. But what you'll do, you will set policies around that for discretionary expenses or expenses that we contribute into the development of society will be X% of your income. That's how companies typically determine their budget in terms of those social or corporate social responsibility. So their policy guiding that around that. So I trust you.
Are there any debts that are outstanding besides those of non-contributors to the NIS right now, and to what tune?
Debts. But we have a loan portfolio. Let me go back to the loan portfolio. Loans and bonds are debts.
No, I'm speaking about specifically monies that will be invested and not recouped or lost on investments or loans.
We have lost investments in terms of we invested in the government of Barbados. They did some restructuring. So clearly you'd lose on the haircut. We invest in syndicates. We've lost some. The CLICO, BICO, NS lost some monies there. So this investment, so the risk established. So in terms of money owed to NIS is basically when we have money at the bank. That's our deposits. That's owed to us. We have money is invested in the government of the US, in treasuries. That's money owed to us. So that's investment. You do loans and we have shares in companies. So equity shares in company, deposits are money we deposit in the banks owed to us. Loans are money we lend that is owed to us. Bonds are monies that we lend and owed to us. Real estate, we own the real assets. So in investment space, you'll have that, especially in the fixed income.
To what tune? Because I know you always mention the asset base and the amount that is basically liquid or is available. So to what tune is the NIS owed right now?
Okay, if we look at let us look at this graph in terms of assets. So you see the 9%, the 28%, and the 24%, that's 52, and that's 61% owed to the NIS. Money we put in bankers in Vincent owed to the NIS. It's a deposit. Money that we lend are owed to the NIS. If they are performing, all our bonds and loans are performing. I gave you case in terms of what we reflect here is the net value after we take provision for impairment. So these are performing assets. 64% in loans and bond, and typically that is our social security. And you're holding in terms of these instruments is a function in terms of where you are with your expenses relative to the income. Yeah, so the bank owes us, we deposit there. Because these monies, we can't put all in equities and all in real estate. You have to create, because the fixed income give you that income to afford you to pay your obligations. Thank you for your questions. Any other questions?
No, obviously, money market instruments are short-term investment, and it is the largest
Yes.
piece of the pie. No, normally, that is where liquidity becomes an issue. So I assume your portfolio is designed this way because of you want to maintain a certain liquidity level.
You sound like an actuary, man. Yes. Asset liability matching. And because at this point that we're using some assets to fund obligation, then what you'll find as a pension fund that most your resources are in fixed income and money market. Like,
My question is, has the actuary recommended anything with regards to your composition of this investment portfolio? And obviously, we're looking at it from the contributive side, but are there any recommendations with regards to investments and how you might be able to recoup
right.
something
So
that is necessary?
the role of the actuary is to assess the financial and actuarial health of NIS. The actuary won't give comments on investment. They're not an investment specialist. Right? Actually, like my good self who qualified in investment, I'm a chartered financial analyst. So I can professionally give advice on investment, but typically an actuary here is a pension fund actuary. They don't give advice on investments.
Okay, so
Yeah.
this is definitely
This is
combination is based on
driven policy-wise from internally, yes. That's what you have for Social Security. These decisions, the investment framework, you have a board, you have an investment committee, then you have the management that execute. But govern all that, we have an investment policy that basically delineates or explain the roles of each party.
Okay, so the composition of this portfolio is basically performing to the level or the reasonable expectations granted
Yes.
the client.
Yes, we are. We are on average because the actuary.
Composition and
Yeah. The actuary would have a rate of return of 4.5, and we are above that. So using that as a basis, yes, we are performing.
Okay, so they do measure.
No, they will set a 4.5% yield, right? That we should try to earn. But they won't give advice, whole bonds, whole stock, as you were promulgating with the composition. They would have because the actuary make a recommendation, a projection in terms of the investment income. So they will say on the reserve on a 4.5%, right? So once your investment portfolio generates higher than that, then you are doing well relative to the actual, we call it hurdle rate.
Okay. Just to mention, I will stop at level 1. But yes, I will CFA as well.
Okay, continue.
No.
I-
Cricket, prayer, can't happen.
Good, deferral, yes. All right, so I'll get Mr. Lewis to.
Yes, it's now afternoon, and must say that we appreciated the turnout. Based on, I consider a very good cross section of the media covering, all ends. And hopefully this presentation, our team embracing pension reform to secure a future tomorrow, on the 11th Actuarial report, that at least we digest it. Now, I must say that the 11th Actuarial report is available on our website. Can be downloaded on our website, and I would ask that persons, maybe go a bit further into it. You might have a bit more information on it. But this synopsis was very well presented by Mr. Haynes. It was very comprehensive in relation to the content. But I would suggest that you go a bit further for yourself and review it. Of course, it will prepare you in terms of what you would disseminate out to others. Yes, once again, we thank you. There's something I just want to say. A lot of things, some terms and words that would be synonymous with Social Security, and we hear it from reports, sustainability, obviously you would hear all the time, reform, labor market, and demographics. And these are areas that going to sound, it's going to resonate with us every time we speak about Social Security, because it's part of the, a main part of Social Security. These terms, these words are going to be used all the time. And it's good that the members of the public understand this, because our conversation go on. Yes, some of the terms might not be suitable for everybody, but we're speaking to everybody. And we know the media represents, they cover a wide cross section of people throughout the nation. So once again, I just want to thank all for coming out, and we hope that you would keep tuned with the NIS. We encourage conversations after. You may inquire to the office for any additional information that you so may require. And also our future conversations. We hope that you stay tuned, so at least you keep abreast in terms of what we're doing as an institution to make persons aware. Okay, so once again, good afternoon all, and have a safe day.